know that uneasy feeling you get sometimes that just kind of creeps up on you out of nowhere, gives you the heebie-jeebies? Judgment Night is the film equivalent to that feeling. Till this day, when we head to cities like Dallas or Houston and are out past nightfall, well, I always tell whoever's driving, hey, don't Judgment Night us. I mean, seriously, last thing we need is 90s Dennis Leary yapping in our ears. So what I'm getting at is, yeah, this movie's a classic. And all of its clout seemingly came after its theatrical run, making for a bona fide cult classic. It is largely due to the straight-to-video market at the time, ironically, that was basically the Judgment Night aesthetic on a budget for the most part when you look at those flicks. And in turn, Judgment Night was one of those big studio, big director, big acted films that wound up on the video store shelves next to its contemporaries like Above the Law and Twin Sitters. I'll get that right.
We're here waiting for Emilio Estevez, and he's one of the stars of the movie. It's Emilio Estevez and me, and Cuba Gooding, and of course me, and a bunch of other guys, and of course me.
I love how this film just seems to get better known every year, and really is a classic all things considered, in many ways ahead of its time. I'm saying that about a 90s thriller starring Estevez and the man, the myth, the legend that is 90s Piven. But I stand by my statement, and ironically, the film soundtrack would basically plant the seed for what would become a response to bubblegum pop, a response known as nu metal. Although in my opinion, the Judgment Night soundtrack is better than any legit nu metal band ever was, but we'll get back to that. Be sure to talk shit to me in the comments. Judgment Night tells the tale of a bunch of yuppies on an RV going to a basketball game. Now, they break down, they witness a murder, and then they find themselves facing off with a 90s Dennis Leary and all of his goons. Needless to say, they do not make movies like this anymore. Judgment Night hit number 14 in its opening weekend, just behind Pinche Rudy. And you gotta remember, this was 1993. Judgment Night has more of a, late 80s feel to it. As the action romps in the early 90s, studio or straight to video, really tended to have heavy sci-fi elements to them. For instance, the number one movie that week was Demolition Man. Ironically, also starring 90s yapping Dennis Leary as a villain of sorts. And the sci-fi stuff would remain a trend that would last a few more years before eventually being taken over once again by big budget, star-driven action features. Then, back to the more low-rent, heavy sci-fi stuff. Then, the 90s were a strange time.
A night out on the town. A heavy traffic jam.
I'll tell you something, I'm not gonna miss this fight.
And one wrong turn.
You broke rule number 1. Do not steal from me. Oh, boys, rule number 2, no witnesses.
It's kind of bizarre looking at the casting through the eyes of 1993. Cuba Gooding Jr., the brother of megastar Omar Gooding, had already been in Boys in the Hood and A Few Good Men, but that's about it. And I've always felt that this was one odd film choice for him. But I mean, what does an odd film choice even mean when we're talking about Cuba Gooding Jr.? I mean, shit.
You may not hear him knocking, but he's definitely coming in. Cutting-edge comedian Dennis Leary in Judgment Night.
Dennis Leary, who plays the heel Fallon, was probably the best known among the main cast. And 1993 was basically the year of Leary, as 93 saw the release of a string of classics. Loaded Weapon 1, The Sandlot, Who's the Man, Demolition Man, and ending the year with Judgment Night, as well as holding it down on MTV and whatnot, and smoking a bunch of cigarettes. Actor Stephen Dorff was still a former child actor. He was still known in certain circles as the kid from The Gate, or as that kid from What a Dummy. Y'all remember that shit? What? And he would get a pretty good push in the early 90s due to his work in The Power of One and, an Aerosmith video, eventually leading to films like SFW. And here in Judgment Night, he'd be the youngest of the cast, portraying John Wyatt, the younger brother to Estevez's Frank. And the king of the yuppies here, the cowardly, pre-genetically modified 90s Jeremy Piven, steals every scene he's in. I asked you, the Staunch Gang, what are your favorite childhood memories of Judgment Night? And my buddy and actor Daniel Zubiate stated that he hated Jeremy Piven in this and that he deserved to die. Piven had roles in films like Lucas and would have an eventful 90s with films like Singles, PCU, Gross Point Blank, hell yes, and Dr. Jekyll, Mrs. Hyde. Check out my review of that film too, why don't you? Another strange piece of casting was Estevez as a former tough guy. A point that never really hits home in the film, even though they do try. We've seen him as a toughie before, but, at this time, Estevez was still basically known as part of the Brat Pack. Notably, that movie about those 20-something-year-old teenagers that show up to weekend detention, get high, and then cry together. What was that? And he was also known for his alcoholism that led to him being responsible for strangers' kids. But Estevez was also on the rise and showcased his many comedic talents in films like Men at Work and Loaded Weapon 1, and was even kind of being pushed as an action star in films like Young Guns and the sci-fi actioner Free Jack. If Estevez's casting feels off, it's because it was. As stated before, it was indeed films like Free Jack and the like, with the action and heavy sci-fi stuff that studios were drawn to, and in turn were also the films that action stars were drawn to. So after attempts at big names like Tom Cruise, Mel Gibson, and even my dog Christian Slater, they couldn't secure anybody by crunch time. So Estevez took it as a way to hike up his asking price and make quite the payday of $4 million. And that wasn't the start of trouble, as the film's script, written by legend Kevin Jarre with an idea from Predator producer Lawrence Gordon, was changed so much by start of production that they received no writing credits. On top of that, the tone of the film was changed as to not be too dark, or too gloomy. And perhaps the worst problem on set was actual gang violence hindering parts of the production, as there were legit murders near the production, and even the theatrical release was hindered by gang violence and was pulled from theaters prematurely. Either that, or people were not responding well to 90s Piven. So I guess a lot of things kind of hindered the film's production in retrospect, but it's okay, because again, the film found a life on the video store shelves next to other action hits like No Way Out and, Bushwhacked? No, that ain't right either. I'll get it. And while it wasn't really in line with its sci-fi counterparts, it did blend a lot of different genres. With Judgment Night, we get a neo-noir, neo-western take on the nitty-gritty 90s actioners that honestly were more popular a few years earlier, like 1988 through 89. And we get some pretty creepy vibes with the changing of scenery from the suburbs to the inner city. Like instead of tumbleweeds, we get trash, really making for a western aesthetic. Instead of a stagecoach, we get an RV, Instead of native savages, we get a monologuing 90s Dennis Leary. Hell yeah. And Dennis Leary plays one hell of a villain here, I gotta say. In fact, I've always liked him playing villainous roles.
You don't understand shit.
Y'all remember the best Quentin Tarantino ripoff? Y'all want me to review that flick too? All you gotta do is let me know in the comments and I will. You have all the power here, Staunch Gang. All I have is a busket. Australian director Stephen Hopkins got his start in music videos, and you can really see the Judgment Night aesthetic in early forms via some of his stuff, For instance, this Ice House video. Well, okay, maybe not that one. Ice House rules. They had a track on Young Einstein. Hear me talk about that one in my Yahoo Serious video. However, in the video for Babies in the Mountains by Peter Godwin, we do get some cool looking urban landscapes and whatnot. And with Hopkins' first feature, the Ozploitation thriller Dangerous Game, we first saw his gritty take on genre films, and thrillers alike. Seriously, this film deserves a second look. Hopkins' career would then blow up in the States with the 1-2 smash of Nightmare on Elm Street 5 and the urban nightmare movie Predator 2, which in a lot of ways is a straight-up horror movie. That bathroom scene always gave me the heebie-jeebies. Ugh. And when looking at Hopkins' early films, You get a real sense of bravado and machismo gone bad, or good depending on the tale, but the machismo factor always seemed to play, a big role, which somehow makes for an interesting dynamic every single time. And mixed with Western movie aesthetics and urban landscapes and Estevez, sign me up. Stephen Hopkins had this to say about his penchant for shooting in big cities. Cities bring a lot of people together and are very scary to lots of people, especially American cities like Chicago or LA. They're designed a certain way where freeways circumvent all the scary areas. You just drive over the top. When we filmed in Chicago, we stayed at the center of town, but we're only 10 minutes away from Cabrini Green, where we shot a big chunk of the project. It was pretty dangerous. Actually, I was sending dailies to Universal to show them what we were shooting in Southwest Chicago, and they thought it was all matte paintings. These were areas that were destroyed in the Martin Luther King riots, really close to downtown. We went to some extreme places. In one location, we were in a dark basement looking around, and it seemed like the whole room was moving. We got our flashlights and turned them on, and the entire floor, walls, and ceiling were covered with rats. It's the same in LA, too, with these tough areas. When we were shooting Predator 2, going downtown to shoot was no joke. I mean, people were shot and died near where we were making it. We got glass bottles full of urine thrown at us, paper bags full of human feces. That was just downtown LA. In Chicago at the time, you'd be driving down these areas, and there'd be people sitting on porches with their rifles out. So as much as we have these movies about yuppies going off in the countryside for a little holiday, and they run into people who don't operate under the same rules as they do, there's an urban sense of disenfranchisement in any big city, I think. As it turns out, Chicago really was primed for that sentiment then. When we were shooting the project, there's that scene where we killed Jeremy Piven, which is one of the first scenes we did. We were shooting, and a shot rang out. A school kid had just had his head blown off from someone who was near our building. The crew ran down, and they caught this 16-year-old kid who had to shoot someone to get into a gang. The next day, the army came in and shut the place down. For us, these yuppies running around thinking we were tough, it was quite an eye-opening experience. Okay, I know what everyone's waiting for here. And truth be told, as much as I love the movie and as great as it really is, the film really lived on due to the sexually horny, groundbreaking soundtrack. Strange how I really can't stand nu metal. Check out my Worst of Nu Metal series, by the way. But I do love the Judgment Night soundtrack, I really do. That comparison is always made, but really, I think the nu metal aesthetic is absent from these tunes. The low end and whatnot, and like the spastic rapping and the jumping up and down, stupid attitude, whatever. And instead, we really get the same dangerous feel from the film, only in audio form with these tracks.
Money makes the world go round.
You're just another victim, kid.
Judgment Night soundtrack features 15 gold and platinum artists, including House of Pain, Run DMC, Sonic Youth, Faith No More, and Pearl Jam.
The raw mixing of genres here was really unprecedented. I mean, Faith No More with Booyah Tribe, Helmet, and House of Pain, Sonic Youth and Cypress Hill, fucking Dinosaur Jr. and Deltron. What the hell were these guys thinking? What a strange decision for an even stranger film that just works. There was even a collaboration between Tool and Rage Against the Machine. However, it went unreleased for some reason for decades, aside from some rips. And my personal favorite tracks here are probably the exploited stuff from Ice-T and Slayer. And of course, the title track. And I really do dig the Sonic Youth Cypress Hill jam.
Luck comes back on the program.
In fact, Kim Gordon had this to say about recording the track. There was a lot of sitting around and smoking pot and listening to the low end. Just a lot of that. I'm not sure how much I smoked. You didn't need to smoke anything. There was so much pot in the air. That was amazing. You know that guy Ninja from Die Antwoord? He's obsessed with our song on that record. The album is probably more successful and well remembered than the actual film, and has been reissued and repressed since its original release, and is highly regarded among rock and hip-hop fans alike. A real crossover appeal that showed for the first time the potential of this stuff. A crossover appeal that did not transfer on film, as far as the box office was concerned at least. As I said, I asked you, the viewers, to let me know your childhood Judgment Night memories, and Albert Salazar of The Inspected had this to say. When I was a kid, my mom was going out once, and I asked her to rent me a movie. That movie? Terminator 2, Judgment Day. She returned with Judgment Night, which is a sentiment I've heard a few times. Regardless of how the film is remembered, overall, I'd say the film is highly regarded for its combination of character actors, stunt casting, cinematography, soundtrack, score, and, not necessarily the writing, which again went through many drafts. But the strong decisions to go with certain looks and feels throughout to make the audience give, an uneasy feeling, and the artistic expression made through the intense, grounded filmmaking, the guerrilla style that they really went with, it made the film really age better and better with time. And although the days of finding Judgment Night on the video rental shelves along other action flicks like Trespass, there you go, Trespass. I told you I'd get it right. In fact, Trespass would make for a sweet-ass double feature with Judgment Night. Judgment Night is a great example of music video director turned film director done perfectly. And the film definitely has an attitude because of that. Hell, we even have the dudes from House of Pain in a cameo. And one of my favorite actors, Peter Green, who probably should have switched roles with Dennis Leary. However, that would have been a totally different movie. I recommend Peter Green's run of indies in the 90s if you have the time. Flawless stuff, really. Find the time. Judgment Night is it's such a rare, perfect mix of different genres. We get a neo-noir western, black comedy, thriller, machismo 90s action movie. How often can you say that movie would not have been as good without Dennis Leary? Are you a fan of Judgment Night? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I've been thinking of doing more flicks like this, 90s obscure kind of awesome action movies. Let me know what to check out. Staunch Gang, as usual, it's been fun. And remember, next time you go to the city, don't Judgment Night yourself, guys. Please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Don't be a fucking loser.